welcome. Very, very warm welcome. Very welcome to Toekomstatelier Oostkop, or at least Toekomstatelier Oostkop as a collaboration, as a space. It also exists, but since we were here with too many people to fit in there, we had to move last moment to another place, which I will shortly tell you also something about. Toekomstatelier Oostkop sprang out of a collaboration that resulted from an exhibition that was in the New Institute last year. I think many of you probably saw it. It was called Nederland op de tekentafel, 100 jaar toekomstideeën, about the future thinking in the Netherlands, in the history, in the past of the spatial planning, architecture, and urbanism in the Netherlands. And we closed that off with a very lively debate at the New Institute, and we immediately realized with a lot of different parties who were thinking about this future that it was very necessary to have a place where we can convene, where we can work together, on the future of the Netherlands, where we can work together on the future of thinking about the spatial planning of the Netherlands, and where we can actively work together there. So we started this initiative together with CRA, College van Rijksadviseurs, the New Institute, de PBL, Planbureau voor de Leefomgeving, Stimuleringsfonds Creatieve Energie en Industrie, sorry, was het maar energie. And this collaboration is just starting out, so I hope to see you back again in one of the sessions that we will host together. Or if you have some ideas about that, please come to us and we can think how to include it in the program. My name is Paul Gerritsen. I'm director for the Deltametropool Association, so also partner of the Toekomstatelier Oostkop. And the Deltametropool Association, for those who don't know, is a think tank for metropolitan development. And of course, we're constantly on the lookout for a better spatial design and planning in this densely urbanized delta that we are living in right now. So now to today. It's 2025, yes, we know. Now what? 2025, of course, traditionally has been known really for a year in which we said, well, in 2025 we will have reached that and that goal, long-term goal, long-term international agreements. 2025 is a pivot moment in the development from the old to the new. Perhaps it is, but maybe not as we envisioned, because as it drew closer, of course, much of the ambition was lost, targets were moved, subjects were changed. Of course, some things changed for the better, but on many occasions we should think, have we perhaps, particularly since the recent political development, have we perhaps missed the moment? So let's pause and consider the role that we have as spatial designers, as spatial thinkers in this moment, to see how to move forward. Perhaps there's other ways of working. Perhaps there's a shift from traditional, maybe this is a little bit hopeful, from traditional government structures to more emerging agents of change. What do these agents of change look like? How should we think about this? This event is part of a series, so we want to start off this conversation here. Actually, we started it already last year with the celebration of 25 years, Deltametropool Association. But we thought it would be, that was looking back very much on this 25 years, and now we thought it's really time to look forward. And to look forward in constructively, let's say, and to see how we can help each other. So we will continue this series during Architecture Month in Rotterdam in July, I believe it is always July, right? Or June. always mistaken, June. And of course I thought a little bit back as well, because of course of this exhibition last year, and also the heritage of the Deltametropool Association, and when we thought back about this exhibition, the exhibition was created by the CRA together with New Institute, and a very central role was there for Nederland nu als ontwerp, the Netherlands now as design. Which was conceived in the beginning of the 80s and executed during the 80s. And actually, it's very interesting to think back about the beginning of the 80s and the moment we were there at that moment. Interestingly, of course, there are some striking analogies, but perhaps also some striking differences. Of course, government stepping back very clearly in the beginning of the 80s. Bleak economic forecast, no future, and in this period, the founder of the Deltametropool Association, Dirk Vrieling, came forward with this idea of having this manifestation about the future of the Netherlands, because he said it's not only all of these circumstances that are lacking, but it's also our possibility as a society and a culture of thinking forward. So it's always very nice to show this preamble of Nederland nu als ontwerp. Written in, of course, like Dirk Vrieling did, no uncertain hand. He knew what he was going to write, and he just wrote it down in one go. Which was written just about the time, the beginning of the 80s. So think about it. Nederland nu als ontwerp. He introduces why this is important. And why is this is necessary? Ecologische overbelasting. So pressure on our ecology, on soil, it says, on water, on air quality. It says economic stagnation. And we have to rethink economy and culturele impasse. So we're not able to think about our future. There's also always this very nice quote he has here, like overbelasting van menselijke zintuigen met non-informatie. Does that ring a bell? I don't know. So I think it's also good to understand we've had these moments of change where we had to rethink how to operate, and I think perhaps it's time again to do that. To help us in this kind of thinking, we've asked an eminent group of spatial designers and thinkers, and they all said yes, so now they're here, so I'm really happy to introduce to you, of course, Floris Alkemade. Hardly needs an introduction, I think, as architect, urban planner, and former chief government architect of the Netherlands. You've grown to become a little bit of the person we rely on as a nation, almost, I would like to say, in bridging societal challenges, space and politics. Of course, with your essay, The Toekomst van Nederland, which was very influential in this thinking, and also, of course, being a guest in Zomergasten, then you're really one of these people who you could say shape the future of architecture and urban planning in the Netherlands. So I'm very happy you're here. Thanks very much. Also here is Nikos Katsikis. He is an urbanist and assistant professor at the Faculty of Architecture and Built Environment at the TU Delft. But also has a long history of doing research at Harvard Graduate School of Design and the University of Luxembourg. And of course your alma mater, I could perhaps say, the Technical University of Athens, and a wide variety of collaborations, including collaboration with ETH Zurich and the Future Cities Laboratory. Your work focuses on the intersection of urbanization, territorial governance, and the environmental transformation. So thank you very much that you're attending as well. Irene Luc Martin, also from the same university, you said already, we're colleagues, of course, at the Architecture of the Built Environment at the TU Delft. Next to your academic and teaching work, you've also worked at fabrications in MVRDV and MLA Plus, and your work centers on the radical spatial imagination and collaborative design, challenging conventional practices. So I think it's interesting to hear about that as well. And then, last but not least, I'm very happy to welcome Lesia Topolnik, who's the winner of the Prix de Rome 2022 with her impressive work, No Instant Landscape. You're architect, artist, researcher, / combining all of these things. And I'm also very happy that you're here and think with us of how all of these things come together. So let's start with Floris. I think we asked you about the role of government and independent agents of change, so I'm curious about your view on that.
I think change is a good caption to it. Looking at our agents of change, well, here they are, and it's interesting, the times we are living in, and of course we are used to politics when it comes to spatial planning. What is the relation? And if we talk about change, I think that is where the real change is happening. And there was a time, not so long ago, where we thought politics were about taking care of people, about knowing what you are doing, and about telling the truth. And that's history. Interesting. Currently, we are living in a different reality, and there's a beautiful name for it, Katsikis. And that is the rule by the worst. And that is, as an experiment, it's very fascinating. What does this mean? Look at the leaders. These are the captain of the ship, planet Earth. Rule by the worst. So that's 2025. What now? Good question. And I think we can learn a lot. I think one of the lessons learned is we are defenseless against stupidity. And of course at least I knew we are defenseless, but I never realized to what extent. And suddenly we realized that, okay, with all our smartness, with all our ideas, with all our power, there's no defense against stupidity. And that is also interesting. And the thing with stupidity is, of course, that it doesn't make sense. So it always takes you by surprise. And but there are more lessons. I think another lesson is that the way we have organized progress is very boring. And it always puzzles me. With all the power we have, with all whatever we can do, we have technology that the world has never seen before. And how is it that we are losing creativity through that mechanism? I think this is also a very important lesson. It's not only stupidity that we are defenseless against. Apparently, we are also defenseless against our possibilities. We are losing individuality, and things are becoming more uniform. And that has to do with what is the necessity for diversity, what is the necessity for creativity. And that is what this time is about. Paul, you said, are we losing it? Did we miss the opportunity? I don't think so. I think this is the moment we have been all waiting for. This is what change looks like. This is what transformative change looks like. And the question is, are we disappointed in our own time and age? Or are we strong enough to get in this time? And to realize, are we strong enough? That is what spatial planning is about, that is what creativity is about, that is what solidarity is about, that is what politics is about, that is what life is about. Are we strong enough to be not disappointed? Are we strong enough to see a way forward? And That, of course, intertwining politics and spatial planning is fascinating. And what I like about spatial planning is that the essence of spatial planning, and maybe also for urbanism and even architecture, the essence of spatial planning is not how you deal with control, but how do you deal with things that you do not control. And the bigger the scale, the less you control. And I think this expertise of working with a lack of control is something very valuable. It means that you're able to deal with forces, that you somehow can make your movements. But it is also what this time is about. We see a lot of rapid changes, we see a lot of difficulties arising, we see a lot of things we no longer, by no means, can control. But that is strong enough. And that is, of course, what is the good news. When I showed you all these cars, all looking almost identical, the lack of necessity. I think what the lesson of this, maybe this year is there are no necessities. And necessity is the mother of invention. And that we of course, we know the way that the CO2 reduction is a real critical element. And it brings innovation, it brings new inventions, it brings change, good things. So work bio-based is something embedded in most minds at the moment. But of course necessity comes in many different forms. I live in a village in Brabant, farmland. The average age of our farmers is around 60 years old. Coming years, 70% of the farmers will stop. So what does that mean for the Netherlands? What does it mean for the open countryside? What does it mean for land ownership? What means it for planning? I think working with farmers, food production is what spatial planning is about. I think if you look the way healthcare systems are working, they all seem to fail at the moment. It's important. That's to do with how we create our cities, how we deal with urbanism, with spatial planning, etc. Work with healthcare specialists. And of course, the new kid in block AI. This is an interesting guy, and he said, okay, what is humanity's last exam? So he reached out to different scientists, the best scientists in the world, and he asked them, can you give me the most difficult question in your field of expertise? So he collected a series of really, really complicated scientific questions in all different sciences. And he said, okay, these questions I'll feed to AI. So he did that, and AI failed miserably. The best was 8.3% correct answers. The expectation is that by the end of this year, 2025, what's next? That by the end of this year, AI will answer correctly half of the questions. This is why he calls it humanity's last exam. And the next domain, of course, is could we define other questions? We still can define questions where we do not know the answers, and maybe AI can, and that we still can verify them. And maybe we then have the questions that we even don't know whether the answers AI is giving is correct. So there's interesting times. This is agents of change. And of course there we can learn from our artists. Gustav Nieuwenhuis, after the Second World War, was living with this idea. At that moment, industrialization, mechanization takes command, and he said, okay, what is the purpose of life if machines do whatever we can do as humans? What are we living for? And that, of course, is something he asked with the industrialization, and we can ask again. What is the meaning? And basically there is one recipe against stupidity, and that is simply, whatever you do, ask yourself what happens next. And that, I think, is what planning or designing, what responsibility is about. And my last slide, I tried to summarize why this moment in time is where the revolution starts. I think as designers we are trained to give people what they want. And that's what we're very good at. Whatever people want, we can design it, we can make it smarter, we can make it bigger. But what we're learning in this time and age is that whatever we want is killing us, is killing the planet, is killing our creativity. So the next step, 2025, what's next? The next step will be, can we reverse design thinking? Not giving people what they want, but protect people against what they want. And that's not born out of arrogance, but born out of responsibility. I think turning our profession upside down it's the right moment. And where politicians and the market fail, maybe we as designers could say, what happens if we try to do what's best for people? What if we tell the truth? What if we know what we are doing? And then the future will be bright and shining. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Floris. Quite a broad view you have, of course. I'm just wanting to try to relate it back to your position in terms of, at your first slides you said what happens if you're ruled by idiots in a way. Stupidity. And of course there's a relationship between politics and the governmental structure, and currently of course we can see how actively it's being torn down in the United States, which is unbelievable almost to watch happening. But do you see still a role of the governmental structure in that change that you say we are needing to make?
Most definitely. And what I like about current politics is the concept of alternative truth. That you can say, oh, this is the real world, but there's many different ways of reading it and defining it. And whether it's true or not doesn't matter anymore. I like that in politics. And what I like about spatial planning is that it's dealing with the real world, in real time, with real matters, with real climate. And so I think the position of designers is becoming stronger by the day. Because at the end, you can live with the concept of alternative truth, but there is no alternative truth. There is one real truth. We still have to believe in that. And at the moment where both politics and the market fail massively, this is the moment where I think design and the emancipation of the designer world can take place. Dealing with the real world, with real issues, with real solutions, and well, that is good news, I would say.
Good. Well, let's see if we can pick on that point maybe later on a little bit further. But now I would like to continue with Nikos. We've actually asked you a little bit of the original question, namely about the idea of the validity and the use of having a strong spatial concept. And maybe for those who don't know, but the Deltametropool was a try in establishing a new concept, a new spatial concept about the city structure in the Netherlands. And of course we can debate, and we have debated about in how much that helped and produced something. But it's also a question of the validity of that kind of use of these forms. So we've asked you this question. Can you reflect on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I don't have a presentation, so I can just sit here. If you can hear me, then I will, or I can stand. Let's see how it goes. But this is exactly what I was thinking, Paul, and because you brought up so many important issues in the presentation, I think we could pick up any of them and have a half an hour discussion around them. But I was thinking not just the spatial question, but being creative about spatial thinking, how we can come up with new spatial concepts, spatial ideas, right? And what I wanted to discuss a bit today is this specifically in relation to the scale question, bringing in a more than city dimension, and I will explain all these issues. So if we recap a bit, first of all, I learned a while, 20 minutes ago, that the Deltametropool has almost a similar history as my studies in urbanism. And I realized looking back that this was a moment that had a certain optimism around urbanism, because people were excited that they had come up with these new concepts about thinking about cities. They were not happy with, the city, the metropolis, right? So all this experimentation was creating a sense of optimism, right? That we have these new concepts, it's the polycentric metropolis, it's corridors, it's the Randstad, right? And if you think about it, it was quite exciting because it was dealing with one of the main issues that cities had in a very creative way. Cities were becoming very problematic in all sorts of ways when they were growing very large, right? It was also an issue about scale. If you read all the critiques of metropolitanization in the early 20th century, they are basically saying, oh, the cities are growing so much, it's like cancer, they are consuming resources, they are packing all these people in, right? So the Randstad and all these polycentric configurations, it was like a way to have cities growing or having the agglomeration economies of cities that were very good for the economy, right? But constructed in a network. So people were excited about that, right? And you could already see that a spatial concept that was in a quite abstract space, because spatial thinking can operate in many different levels, could be very concrete, about very concrete solutions, could be very abstract, could be at meso levels. Something that started as a very abstract thinking, because even the city as a concept doesn't exist, obviously, we have constructed it, right? But the polycentric metropolis is a completely abstract idea, right? But then it started having some very interesting effects on the actual governance of cities, because it was challenging, maybe you are really struggling to govern these cities because a lot of cities a lot of things happening there are transcending their boundaries, right? Why don't you try collaborating with each other and creating networks that bring together, governance, they bring together the functions of cities, they collaborate, they coordinate, right? And I think this is a very interesting example of how upscaling, let's say, the positive effects of urbanization through that was based on spatial imagination. I think then it went kind of out of control. You had all these discussions on, the blue banana, all the different corridors. Everyone kind of wanted to invent polycentric conditions, even if they were not the case, right? And I think that the critical point is somehow summarized also in a critique of Saskia Saskin herself on the actual global city discourse. Because she was saying, look, when I introduced these concepts, the polycentricity, the networks, it was not just to celebrate things, it was also to highlight that together with these new conditions, we have some new problems that are emerging, right? So don't try to be necessarily like a global city, don't try to be necessarily like a polycentric metropolis. Also look at the issues that are created because of that, right? Of course, the issues were mostly social by then. But what I realized in all this discussion, and this is what I want to bring up, I think we had all this excitement about scale, rescaling cities, polycentricity, where does the city end, how it connects with other cities, at what scales. The nation state is not important, maybe it's now regions coming together, maybe it's now countries coming together, leapfrogging in between spaces, right, that we can return later, which created a lot of issues, of course. But I was thinking, in all this discussion, we kind of missed completely the point that the cities are not only connected with other cities, spatially, they are also connected with areas that are not cities, that are providing all the resources for city building, for the metabolism of cities, so energy landscapes, food landscapes, you mentioned food should be part of the planet, right? And in this discussion of globalizing cities, cities being rescaled, cities becoming networks, we kind of completely forgot that cities also have this other layer of connections, right? And as we're forgetting it somehow in urbanism, because we're too excited with inventing corridor developments, the polycentric cities everywhere, it was becoming very prominent in ecological thinking about the city. Right? So the footprints of cities and the metabolism of cities started becoming a problematic condition, right? And it was also becoming interestingly interwoven with the globalization of these cities. Right? So together with the globalization of cities, we had this globalization of the hinterlands, we could call them, or whatever we want to call them, right? And these hinterlands, they were creating also very problematic situations, right? Because you had these globalized, upscaled environments to support the growing urbanization, and you had this disconnection of the regional systems of supply from the cities as they were maybe even in the 19th, 20th century. So somehow this fell off the map. And to me, this is an interesting question to bring back in attempting to be creative about spatial imaginaries. Because let's say in the same way that you had 30 years ago, you had all these discussions on polycentric metropolis, polycentricity, that ended up giving us the Deltametropool, the Randstad concepts, all these new forms of governance. What would be the similar spatial concepts if we really wanted to rethink the relationship of cities with the hinterlands, with the metabolic landscapes? Right? Do we have any spatial concepts? Or because these are so dissolved spatially and in terms of scales, it's really hard to pin them down. For example, you look around that, it's very productive land, right? It's very productive both in terms of food, energy, you see windmills, you can see the greenhouse, right? Is this really directly connected with the cities here? How does it really work? Probably it's more connected to international trade, as we all know, than it is to feeding cities, right? So I think we're completely missing a bit spatially the imagination and the actual analytical tools to understand how this relationship works. We somehow have these very abstract footprint ideas. I mean, if you start digging into these footprint metrics, you realize that they're all about abstract space. They are basically translating different types of volumes and indicators into very abstract units of space. They don't really correspond to anything real that exists. That's why we can say, oh, we have already exceeded the footprint, right? Because it actually doesn't exist on Earth. And then we have these concepts of metabolism of cities, which are all about flows, right? Tracing the flows, how things move around, which again, they are not really spatialized. They are kind of dissolving space into the networks of logistics, of flows, of energy connections, of pipelines, that are all kind of invisible to us, right? So somehow this ends up becoming part of this discussion that we're having today of the voting patterns being very different between cities and the non-cities. Geopolitical tensions starting to be more about the resources, the primary resources, and less about the financial system anymore in the industry, right? It's like a war for resources. Rescaling boundaries geopolitically from the nation to the European Union to the different trading blocks starts being again very critical about the material economy itself. No one is talking anymore about, London and Tokyo and New York are connected in a financial system of resources. It's like this doesn't matter anymore. We acknowledge that capital is kind of spaceless, right? But there are all these other things that are very grounded in space, for which we really have no idea to put forward on how they should be resolved. Right? We have questions of circularity, for example, of post-growth. For example, what's the scale of circularity? When you say it's a circular region, what should we envision? Does it work at a certain scale better than in other scales? When we're saying we want to localize the food supply, or the energy supply, or the resources, what does this even mean? Do we have like a boundary that we think? Is it like a region? Is it a country? Is it Europe? Is it the North Sea, for example? What is it exactly? I think we're completely lacking something to put forward that people will understand, that explains how these cities and the modern cities landscapes relate to each other. And I think until we do it, we will keep having all these tensions between the urbanite elites, or people living in cities and take advantage of agglomeration economies, and all these other people that are part of these more primary production economies that feel that they are completely disconnected. And maybe they are, but they're connected to other things that we don't really understand how they come together. Right? So for me, besides you know, this very archetypal hinterland condition, which is basically city and the region, we're completely in the blind when we are about to put something forward. And this, for me, would be an interesting exercise, right? Not think, you know, I mean, we have inherited, of course, useful concepts like polycentricity, the Randstad, all these things, but we're kind of lacking a similar concept that explains this relationship of the city to the hinterland in a contemporary manner. So this is what I would probably want to discuss more today, but also you brought together so many interesting points that we can link them together.
Yeah. Good, great. Thank you very much. But one central argument you have is that this scaling up basically has grown too far in a way. It's basically, even you say it has become spaceless almost. So the spatial dimension is completely lost. Are you also then saying, well, we should scale back, we should look at a smaller scale?
I think this is exactly for me the important thing, that because we don't control scales that are beyond a certain level, let's say mentally, we can have an understanding of the global logistic chains, right, for example, right? We feel it's out of control, right? We also don't have a spatial concept to understand it, right? And maybe, I don't know if this is really the case, maybe this is why it's so easy for everyone to say that the response to global trade and all these connections being created on this huge footprint should be to localize our footprints and create these localized ecoregions, right? Which actually are becoming very problematic in themselves. They can become very authoritarian, they can actually lock in populations, they can have to do with migration controls, right? So if you say, oh, it's an ecoregion, you need to supply the population, then the population is kind of dependent on the resources that you have. It's an argument against the mobility of people.
Yeah.
So I would really emphasize exactly this point, that the fact that we don't understand the global economy and we were only able to understand it through its negative side effects doesn't mean we should not be looking forward to reconstructing a multiscalar world that allows resources and people to actually circulate freely, right?
People wanting to interject already? Should we continue? One interjection. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. I've always understood spatial concepts as a means to control something, right? Here we can do something, and here we cannot. Mostly built form. If what you're talking about of making a spatial concept for the connection between the city and the hinterland, is that something you can do? Is it something you can control, and should it be?
I'm not sure I would agree that it's only about controlling. Let's say you have a certain situation that reflects a certain spatial imaginary, right? What prevents you from constructing an alternative spatial imaginary that will allow you to break out of this one, right? I'm not sure if it's necessary about controlling things. It might actually be about allowing you to break out of this control.
One more?
You mentioned it's difficult to visualize, and as spatial thinkers we like to look at maps and then see the spatial concept on the map. But there's also information architecture, right? So what of these flows are not necessarily something that's visible on a map, but actually needs another type of way to be able to see it and to understand it, and a different way of conceptualization. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about, or had like that train of thought, and what your,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, others can also interject, of course, but I mean, for me it's quite important what you say, because understanding scales that are beyond our immediate environment and our immediate perception mean that you start depending more and more on abstract symbolic languages, right? A map, for example, is full of these things, right? And these are always based on assumptions that construct them, right? And they are hiding behind them all these socio-technical processes, right? So, of course, you depend more on mapping, but then maps are constructed in a certain way. They use data that are produced in a certain way. So you are always much more skeptical and less confident about your understanding when you have to depend on more and more abstract means, right? And maybe this is also a reason why we are, it's difficult for us to be convinced about new spatial concepts, right?
But I think in that respect, it's also there it's important to realize there's also a real world. And cities, of course, are completely artificial. They don't produce their own energy, they don't produce their own food, they don't produce their materials. They feed like a queen bee. And outside the city, there is a real world. That's where the big warehouses are, that's where the food is produced. And there it's not an abstract flow, there's real trucks with real people doing real work. And the two are interdependent. Having said that, I think the city cannot survive without the countryside, but the countryside can survive without the city. So there's a different game going on at the moment.
If I could add something to that, I think it's a very interesting point. Because exactly what makes, for example, food production so important is that in theory, in the condition of peasantry, let's say, you could still have self-sufficient farmers living there, caring about no one, right? But I'm pretty sure if you go to the farmers right now, they buy their stuff from Albert Heijn or Jumbo like everyone else, right? I don't think they feed off their land, probably. I'm not sure that their land is actually so diverse that we can provide all these products.
Also fertilizers, which come somewhere from abroad.
So in theory, they could be disconnected, but exactly because they are connected,
No, exactly. That's the
they lose this autonomy, let's say.
Okay, interesting point. Sorry, I have to cut it short. Maybe for now too late, perhaps you have another chance. But let's keep this in mind. Basically conceptualizing different relations is what you say, and that can help really to break out of current ways of thinking. In that sense, spatial concepts are valid means in this day and age as well. Now I would like to continue to end our contribution. We've asked you about the relation between design and planning. Of course, this is a classical one, you could almost say, but also the changes in that dynamic, and of course the new forms of design that we have on a regional scale, or research by design, or collaborative design, what have you.
Yeah, thank you.
The floor is yours.
I also try to connect the conversation so we keep going.
Yes.
I also didn't bring slides because I like more I took it more like a conversation, and in that sense I feel like it's not only here but also there, and I was thinking a lot in these terms between spatial design and spatial planning, and I don't find myself in any of them, or in both of them, or in all of them, I'm not sure, but I was actually trying to ask, and maybe you can just put the hand up, but who here thinks themselves as or feels like a spatial designer? Okay, and a spatial planner? Okay, who feels as an architect? So, okay, there are some more people like me. We are everything at the same time. And I think that is a very interesting debate that is constantly, I also feel like in the last 50 years we are constantly discussing our agency and what we are as designers, or as planners, or as architects, or as urbanists, or has many thousands of names. I also think it's a very Western-centric construct what a designer is, and we usually actually exploit that in that way. So I myself am deconstructing my own learnings in this process, and I don't know if I'm gonna tell you a truth, but I'm gonna tell you my truth right now. But I feel, when I read this question, it came to me the idea that I have been in a generation where I have been educated through my higher education, so university. I studied architecture, I did a master in urban design, and then a PhD in urban planning, so I kind of went all over the scales. But in the university, I remember when I was studying architecture, I was really taught about the what. What do we do as designers? What does it look like? And the object, and praising the object. And I think that's also why I'm in the Netherlands, because when I finished all that, I went to the Mecca of the what, to try to learn to become a better designer. And what I learned here, actually, funny enough, I ended up in the University of Amsterdam with sociologists, so I really went out of the what. And I realized that I was getting engaged in a generation, and I think the new generation is coming much from the how. And I think that's something that is really triggering me in a positive way, into the understand that we have put a lot of focus in what we design, and I think also historically there has been a lot of focus in how to design, but I think for me the procedural aspects of what are the conditions we are designing with, what are the attitudes we are projecting when we design, is very much a new question. And I think maybe much relates to the agency, no, or to challenging the conventional agency that designers have, because what for us is a basic design skill. When I have been operating in the last 5 years in non-westernized regions, I think it's actually a very neo-colonial approach to deal with design. And I myself, in the last 10, 12 years working in practices, I have challenged myself, like, what am I doing in these projects? So I work in projects in India, or projects in Peru, or projects in whatever. From here, actually, I was mostly doing from the Netherlands, but I was all the time feeling there was something wrong. There was something that it was not suited with the way I operate ideologically. And I actually connected very much with Floris, because I feel like in that how, there was a very strong lack of the theme of justice, in that sense, the theme of understanding the social responsibility we have as designers. And I think there has been a lot of historical shyness in the last decades from designers to dare to think. And of course it comes from, because in the 80s and in the 70s, 80s, there was a big movement that we need to include people. We need to be participatory, we need to be collaborative. And that came together at a time that designers stopped to feeling free to design, because they were seen as this megalomaniac, no? That is doing the Plan Bassin, that is doing the Chandigarh, that is doing this, which I personally don't agree on that, because I think there are many processes behind also those master plans. Things to learn from there. But I think that fear to become a megalomaniac, it also killed a bit of the daring process. So daring to imagine radically different, daring to imagine alternatives. And I know we all have those imaginaries of what the CIAM was doing, or what the Archigram was doing, or Super Studio, and they are still, at least it's my generation, but they are part of our beings and our program thinking and our ideas of thinking. And it, at the same time, it has killed our capacities to keep dreaming. So to me, I debate myself in a big dilemma that I actually want to pose a bit more in the crowd, in the debate here. But it's the dilemma of, like, till what extent are you imagining, and to what extent your imagination is taking you to actually perpetuate injustices in the places you are imagining. And how do you navigate that thin line? And I think that's very interesting, because, for instance, the fact that we think cities are an artificial element, I think it's also a westernized idea of what city is. Because when I have operated, for instance, when I was operating in Peru, in the Lima specifically, and in all these kind of the so-denominated slums, for them that's their city. So, and I came to kind of do a project of, how do I call it, renewing or formalizing the informal. And to me, when I was talking with that population, they didn't need to be formalized at that sense. But then we get to the hyper-city, hyper-construct, and the capacity to not keep even the health systems in the city. And then you see the two constructs, the social constructs coming together, and there is a collision of realities. And I think in that collision, we designers are usually taking sometimes and many times the stupidity role of thinking that our reality is their reality, when actually our education is mostly westernized, and our reality of what is a good design is also westernized. So then Many times I'm operating now in this idea of radical spatial imagination, which is an idea of defining these spatial imaginaries, which is exactly the same we do every day in our practice. But the radicality is very much more about rooting. So understanding the root of what we do, understanding the root of the causes of the social issues we are dealing with, and understanding also that the space has very much a connotation how justice relates. I'm going to give a clear example. For instance, last 2 weeks, we did a winter school, my partner Jonathan Stuveno and I. We created a summer school called Justice by Design. I'm also exploring all the time what is the role of justice in our spatial design aspects. And it was 90 students from the academy, so most of them working in offices and in different type of skills, architecture, urbanism, landscape. So it was quite diverse. I remember the first day when we started and talk about the idea of justice by design, which is an idea of thinking on design not from an heroic approach and not from a solution-driven approach, but more from exploring the ideas of what are the constructs of the social construct we are defining with form. They were completely blown apart. They were like, what do I have to do with justice? I have nothing to do with justice. I have nothing to do with social constructs. To me, that was really shocking because I navigated 1 week of people completely disengaged, people completely uncomfortable to deal with justice issues, and where I had to almost every day invent new methods to talk about positionality, to talk about designing methods, to talk about alternative realities. We have five cases. One was in Sahara, it was in Palestine, so we were really talking about also other realities in the world, and where our skills that we have been trained in the faculty don't work, because if you design an oppressive system, throw away all your democratic skills, and they don't work at all. So then we were exposing them to that, and what was really fantastic to see is that in the middle of the week, many of them were like, I have no clue if I can talk about justice, but I know I'm not doing the right questions in my office. And they were mocking their offices. They were coming to us telling that in our offices they are laughing at us because we are doing our winter school about justice by design. What do we have to do with justice? Well, to me, it became a transformative journey because I realized we do have a lot of agency in stupidity. And we have to find what is the agency. And I don't want to become a whole debate of decades of what is the agency of spatial designers in justice, but I do think we have to find how to hack the system we are in. We are all working in companies, in universities, in different institutions. We all have a certain level of action wrong. My way to deal with those type of images is either I just turn off everything and run away and I don't know where I go, or cry in a corner, or I just wake up every day and work with my students and also work in companies, in projects, and try to really define how can I hack the system today. Because I cannot wait for the system and I cannot wait for the governments, because I don't think we have more time to wait. So that's maybe something to connect afterwards.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Very interesting. So Anius Horstra came up to me in the beginning when he walked in, and he said, I'm really curious about this evening and how activistic we will become. Are we going to block roads? Are we going to... And I'm curious about that question in your perspective, because basically you analyze the designer definitely as a sort of intermediary role between maybe the representing power very often and how to deal with that. But your journey is very much an introspective journey. How do you look at that quest that Anius put forward?
No, but it's a very interesting question, because currently I'm debating a lot about this, because I think activism is highly prosecuted. And I think that's wrong, because I think we are all activists in a certain way. We act in our life, in our everyday life, the way we consume, the way we eat, the way we travel, the way we commute, is part of act of life. So in that sense, I'm an activist in certain direction, and it's related to my ideology, and I think that's what we should stop being shy about. That we should very much, as designers, also take positionality. We all have a background, we all have a gender, a condition, a region, a feeling, a power dynamic within our setup. And if we don't expose that in our practice, we are being naive about our reality. We are not being clear of our biases. We have them anyway. You are designing the bathroom or the public space or the street or the region of everyone. So I think the activism is like I try to engage with others that are like me. And I think that's something that to me is meaning towards my process and towards what we need to do. So I think, yeah, designers are activists inherently.
Can you live with that, I mean?
Can I ask something? I think, well, I don't know if it's questions, but it might be very interesting the way we educate designers in learning, first of all, that all societal issues and developments have effect on spatial planning. If you don't understand that, whatever we do, and it has to do with control and power and all these things, I think that should be also part of the education. So that really talking about these societal issues and what they do to spatial planning and to design itself. And we should talk more about that than, you know, do only the design and then looking at the design and then say, oh, it's beautiful or not, etc. But it has to do with all these processes. Because when we design, we do not only design products, but also processes and services and all these things. And the students have to, well, you're in education, like you said, have to understand it, but you have to also apply it to your own office and whatever you do as a designer yourself.
And I think there is an interesting click on this. I cannot change the curriculum of a whole master, but I can act on the courses I teach at the tutoring side. And for instance, small changes. I ask them not to do a postcard of what sustainability is. I ask them to do a postcard of what their positionality is. So train critical mindset. And whatever position it is valid as long as they expose it. I also think there is a click, like I always put them an image of the world and then I show them that actually only 30% of the world is a democratic system. And only 8% is classified a healthy democratic system. So what do they do in the rest of the world when they are designing with the tools we are training them? So they need to at least, I cannot change maybe the tools or the skills I'm training because the curriculum is a push I'm doing, but it takes time. But we can really equip them with the critical thinking of it's not enough what you are learning. It's just a very small part of the whole.
Yeah, you can only do a part, and the rest they have to do themselves.
Yeah.
They have to be curious, they have to be wondering, they have to be, you know, and the dialogue is very important, to have all the time this kind of discussion.
Also that impacts in professional life, because for instance, last year we were in the graduation final moment, and we were having a debate about, so there are 90 students coming out of the urbanism track, and then I was like, okay, what do you feel you are? None of them say spatial designer, none of them say spatial planner, actually none of them even coincide in a name. I had a list of 20 names, because I was a space maker, thinker, process developer, I don't know, there were so many, public space designer, architect, there were so many. And then I realized, I don't care, I don't need to put them a label as long as they know how to act in their daily life. And then some of them really were like, when I'm gonna design in this office, this bathroom, I'm gonna sneak in without maybe the boss realizing to put in a bit more equal space between the man and the woman rather than that distribution of the space. That was one woman who was working with me. But then there was another one talking about, I actually want to ask these questions in the office differently. How are we treating the local partners? Are they not even able to even bring more knowledge to us than we to them? So this type of, I think, arena, that's why I actually went back to academia, because I think for me, those are the agents of change. And I think maybe that connects with the future conversation, but the idea is like, those are the agents of change. I'm not going to rely anymore in the governments exclusively. I think we have to be responsible of them, and bold them, and define them, and fight it in the collective. But I think those agents of change are the ones we also need to put a lot of energy into.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much for this. It also gives you a lot to think about for yourself, also probably, particularly of a certain age. So you realize like how much you're perhaps caught in your way of thinking and working, and the necessity to break out of that. I want to continue. Lisa, you also have brought some slides, so we asked you actually also quite perhaps traditional question about the balance between imagination and reality, and particularly, of course, in this day and age. I think Floris already introduced this tension. So
I was asked to reflect on the imagination and reality, and I will do it through the sequence also of the examples of some of my works. We do not really have time to go very deep in them, but I hope we can discuss it later on as well. So for me, first of all, what the relationship also between all the themes which I discussed and between the reality and imagination is that how our world is actually constructed from the very different realities which are not immediately visible, and in order to actually understand it, you need imagination to visualize it. And there are, as you see, there are different biological, big tech, climatic, geological, chemical realities, and many more that influence our space and materialize in it. Okay. And one of the projects, indeed, like that Paul also mentioned, that I made earlier, that kind of was an attempt to visualize the reality and actually build a new reality that was known as a landscape pre-drawn, and it was also about the reconnecting and recognizing that our reality consists between air, surface, and underground, and these realities they mix together. And I also have education in arts and architecture, urbanism, and ecological design. So I have many different studies, but I prefer to think about myself that I work with space, and my quality is that I try to visualize indeed like these invisible systems through the different type of spatial interventions, and it could be an installation, it can be I will show later a certain intervention within the city, within the building structure, or vision for the city. So one of the projects that I'm currently working on is the project that is exploring the influence of the energy transition of the European Union on North Africa, and specifically Morocco. These are my photographs from the last year. And it's a project as well like that reconnects actually the indigenous population, which struggled, of course, with the with the new infrastructures that need to come in. In Morocco there is, like, for example, the largest concentrated solar plant, and Morocco positions these new structures as a very progressive, but they don't really acknowledge that the local population doesn't get enough of benefits, and these are also some of the let's say colonial systems that are still present nowadays, that I try to visualize or give voice within my work nowadays. And
I was making research with local people, but also it's a collaboration with a local partner, Think Tangier. And so what we are trying to do is to reconnect different people and to acknowledge this problem. So actually working with space, but through the different means than the direct and the very controlled urban planning. And this project it is still ongoing, so I will be happy to update you on it later. It was part of the architecture biennial, and there I wanted to show part of the process through through this installation. So it's kind of like it's a 5 meter high installation, with which I wanted to tell the narrative, but through the space. So it's also about emphasizing how this energy transition manifests through the daily lives, through the very local materials, and how it's actually our global forces transitioned to this high-tech, they press on the local indigenous knowledge. And it's also like how from the very small elements you can create a certain force. So that I think these are the projects that something that I'm fascinated within my project, because it's also that I come from the Ukrainian Ukraine, my country, and I do not come from the country where I believe that the government was good, but I did saw several revolutions, and of course there is a war, and so I think in me it's very present how one person together with many others can become a very powerful force. And I think like this kind of a bit of activism lives in me still. And this is the project that I did, a very short project, of course, in New York. So I was living on this government island, and it's an island that is currently undergoing kind of like another transformation into the ecological hub, but it's not actually. It's coming from the from Amazon and from different disinvestments which take out the local communities. So I was working with the activistic groups there to kind of like to discuss the issues that are going on. But what I made, so I tried to go directly in the intervention. So this is the redevelopment of the island now. It's extremely unsustainable what they want to do, like by positioning there this sustainable hub. So I sorted like different materials from the island, and I wanted to turn this governance island into the governing island, and to bring it back to Manhattan, because the island was actually sold earlier to the Dutch, and I made this kind of like let's say a performative activistic act to occupy Manhattan, and in order to return to the values that were before the island was sold to the Dutch. It was actually during the elections of the new president in America, so that was a bit inspired by that. And so it was also about how you can govern, let's say, by taking and claiming space. So it was an intervention to experiment how this very controlled space within New York, how can you occupy it? And so at the end, we made this kind of like a performative act at the Bowling Green. It's where where Manhattan was sold to the Dutch. And I can tell details if you like later, but this is one of the examples, I think, how you can have an imagination and a certain agency to experience, this is something that everyone can do each day, right? This is about how how you can intervene in certain systems and how you can also engage people. Because, for example, those are people from the activistic groups, but they cannot access the public that well. So they thought that it actually worked much better for them to be present this way and working also with spatial designers, because it gives a certain engagement, because people start to ask, oh, what are you doing, what is going on, oh, this is really a problem, oh, I didn't know it was like sold to the Dutch before, oh, so it provokes a different relationship. We also were just going by the road, like, so cars had to stop, so it was very interesting. But okay, going back to the Netherlands and a bit maybe to more practical way to give an example how you can combine imagination and reality. This is the manifesto for the line 2029. So it's a project about the historical CH line, which surrounded Den Bosch, and it was in 1629 when it was built in order to CH, to, let's say, for some people it's occupy, of course, Den Bosch, but it's, let's say, it was liberated from Spain. And it was a system, 49 kilometers long system of dikes in order to make the city drier and, in order to be able to take it. Because at the moment, Den Bosch is the city where different flows of nature and water coming in, and they still get these problems. So idea was for, so I was asked to think about what is the role of this line and what are the, what kind of, what can it be role in 400 years later, right? Because it's an anniversary, and then Bosch is facing still this problematics of rising water, and also the whole Netherlands might go let's say, dry in a way that we will not have enough of drinking water within 5 years. So it's a very, very urgent problem, of course. But so idea was to go from the vision of the, let's say, military and controlled line, like to something that is recognizing that this was just a moment in history that identified that people wanted to control the nature, right? So it's and the next, let's say, line could be something that we are recognizing that our relationship with the surroundings should be different. So it's again like reconnecting the air, surface and underground, and how you then also influence the policies around the city with that. It was of course inspired by the Hieronymus Bosch, and that kind of idea was to create these experimental gardens around the city. So with this line that could also grow soil with the fluctuation of water. So based on the qualities of the city now. And the idea was also that this line could reconnect the different regions and the countryside of Den Bosch with its city. And it's not it's not a strict planning, but it's a curatorial framework. With these gardens, as I said, to kind of, it's also what is interesting is that Den Bosch is the UNESCO learning city, and it's also kind of frames and position it as this learning through the direct context and learning how we differently connect with our surroundings. And of course it has to generate something new within the city, let's say, and idea is that new line will be the liberation from the unsustainable systems. with the seeds of gardens. There are different examples how you can visualize these gardens. I'm not going to explain it. And of course, if you have enough of imagination, we can also think about this, these defense lines all being kind of like gardens of learning, etc. So it's just one of the examples. How I think imagination and reality can coexist in a productive ways. But what I want to emphasize, of course, is that there are many different ways, and this is what my tools are. But I think each designer or each person has their agency of change, and it can be very powerful if you are very passionate, especially about it. So thank you. I don't know where to stop, but
Thank you very much, because indeed I think very interesting how you. I'm very tempted to connect all the dots that I now see starting to appear. Also, Nikos, with what you just said, it goes quite well in line with what you just introduced in terms of the power of imagination, also in bringing forward this kind of linkages. I thought it was very interesting that you said, well, actually this imagination is an activistic force in sort of uncovering this reality that is actually the reality that we think is visible for everyone, but it's actually not. And that's of course very, very true point to emphasize that. But then on top of that, to do something with that in order to have some agency, so to change something in that. So actually very classic role, I would say, of a designer, you could say, in a different context.
So I think that's exactly what the presentation was about, and I also could relate it, of course, also to imagining other, I think, cultural recognition. So for me, that's also because I did projects in different contexts, and that's from one side is something that you cannot imagine. I was also I just came from Ghana as well, and this is I literally could not imagine, but there are for sure that we have to, as a designers, to see many different things in order to be able to generate it, and that's also what's gonna, I think, be the role of designers when there comes this physical AI and etc. Right? So that's going to be quite influential. Exactly your imagination, because you are the one who directs or asks questions, and
It's the next level in a way. Yeah. Okay, I think we have to look a little bit at the time, but also at the energy level. I'm looking at the room. Do people want to interject? Do they have things like, okay, but I really don't understand what you're all talking about here on stage, and have some clarity from us? There's at least one, and well, actually, Jonas, you already was stopped short, so you could actually also have a go, and then there as well. So let's have these couple of questions. Maybe Jonas, you want to start?
I have a question actually for both of you, from Nikos and from you, Lesia, also. Do you have the feeling that, in a way, our work is kind of making a start of the question you were asking at the beginning, which is not the definition question, but the visualizing question about these invisible threads? And do you have the feeling that, in a way, after hearing him, that this is a kind of the way he was going in his thinking? So it's kind of a dialogue. And also I had just a side part with Morocco. That's why also I think it's very relevant, because with what you were saying, I was thinking about a kind of global interlens, so not only the regional one, not only the the countryside, but also I was thinking about what happens in Goma right now, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is very important for our smartphones and our computer, even if we don't all know that, but actually it is. And the example of Morocco was also, in a way, appealing to this. So, do you think there is interconnection?
Yeah. No, I was really thinking about it, and I was, I mean, it's a broader discussion probably, but in general, from my experience in mapping, you can see a virtue in that it's part of a project of disclosure, right? That you want to reveal something that might be hidden, right? But also it's a project that has a lot of blind spots, right? So you present something in a certain way, you cannot actually present it in the multiple ways in which it is perceived, right? So while we were presenting, I was thinking that I think a great strength of projects like that is that it doesn't really reveal something, it makes people curious. So it's like something like a point that they want to find out, right? You reveal a situation, you don't describe it, but then you allow people to engage. And for me, in a moment where we have a lot of alternative facts and people just being convinced immediately about whatever they might hear that is aligned with how they see the world, right? To me, making people really curious about digging on their own and having a really informed decision about things. So putting in, the labor, right? Not this lazy approach. Oh, I heard it. This guy said it. That's it. Or the other guy said it. That's it. And it's always the guy that says it, of course. Or a map that's or a diagram that you can use in different ways, right? I think this approach that is somehow just inviting people is really, really valuable for me.
Can I add on this
Sure.
very quickly? But because I was curious, because I also have a student doing a graduation thesis in Morocco, and right now Morocco is an authoritarian region, and it's actually so the indigenous knowledge, which I find very interesting in your picture and very revealing, is that you take the indigenous knowledge there. But what I actually think the indigenous knowledge, for instance, in Morocco is it's keep the word, but they move around.
Yeah.
The nomads.
They were nomads, but because of the authoritarian region, they were oppressed, and then they were establishing the Western idea of city composition. I think what I find very interesting is it's true that we can reveal and visualize, but I think it's important we don't stay in the visualization mode. Because in any visualization, like Nikos is saying very well, there is agency on what we are showing and what we are not showing. And there is responsibility too. So it's also our activists or non-activists, or call it whatever you want, but it's also our responsibility to know what information we are deploying when we are visualizing. So I think that agency is really very much deactivated in our education and also in our practice. And I think that's an important one to link back.
I just want to add on to the same point, because I think it's a question for all four of you. Thank you so much, first of all, for the whole inspirational talk. Both of you pointed out from this knowledge from society, really learning from the local context, people. There's much more indigenous knowledge there rather than what we are doing sitting here thinking about other places. Nikos mentioned about this mapping aspect, visualization aspect, and you also mentioned about that we are being less creative day by day with this whole car situation. So maybe as designers, planners, we are also fixating ourselves too much on the mapping or designing on paper. So my question is more for the future, to really interact more or dialogue more with the society. What kind of new visualizations or new formats or representation do we actually can think of when we talk about justice? Because this is also something, not what people want, not giving them what they want, but actually arguing with them that what is better for them. So what kind of formats would be some...
I think it's very small sample. Oh, you go first. You go.
No, I think that there is no one answer. So I think that everyone skilled in something. There could be an IT person, like that. This is their tool. So what I believe is that everyone can have like an idea or like that they want to translate, and but everyone has different mediums. So you can use your own medium. If your medium is mapping, do it through mapping, like, you know. So it's a challenge yourself, of course. And I also think that, like, if you look at education, for example, in UK, like AA or CA in different schools, it's really it's already for quite a long time that they don't talk just about mapping, right? Like, it's not about that, that you come in architecture school and you're gonna be an architect. You can be a writer, whatever. So I think that it's really, maybe this is actually something that is very important, especially with this AI and etc., is that everyone becomes very critical about what they are standing for, what they are good at, what they are passionate about, and because all the tools will be there to help you to reveal it. So that's.
But I think the map itself is not a problem. As long as you realize that every map is a lie. A map is a map. It's telling more what you're not shown than what you show. In a way, it's also the alternative truth. I think if you look at the work of Malaysia, for instance, she's revealing a reality that we do not see. And I think it's more the awareness of blindness that counts. And also answering your question, I think for students, I always teach my students to not answer the question, but to start to redesign the question itself. Because I think formulating the questions is much more creative than jumping into the answers. And I think this notion of are we addressing the right questions is what we need.
Okay, you
Just
wanted to...
very quickly, but there are other formats like storytelling, which you mentioned, and other ways of also defining that a space can be told and can also be embodied. And I think those are new formats that are being experimental now, but they need to be embraced by our practice at some point.
Yeah.
Also in the way we operate with local partners, not just sitting around a table and putting sticky notes. There are other ways to embody participation.
I had promised two more questions at least, and then we go towards a wrap-up. So I want to do that now. Probably you can hop in still quite a bit, so don't worry. But you had still a question.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. Thank you for your presentation, very inspiring. To me it was really about making the invisible visible in a kind of way which you show us. And since you're doing a lot of projects in different cultures, as in Morocco or wherever, I can imagine that for you as an Ukrainian person, would you like to do something in Ukraine itself? Is it on top on your list, or do you avoid it, or what is your dream in that sense?
Yeah, I have done some things in Ukraine, and those actually were very important projects for me. One of them was on the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. Floris was my mentor, and then I had like the first slide that I showed, No Innocent Landscape, that was also about the region in Ukraine between the Donetsk and Luhansk, where MH17 Dutch plane was shot down. So for me it was also about more not a direct planning but a reconstruction and going back what is actually going on in the country, like even now with the so I as well do participate at the moment in the what's going on in Ukraine. It's very difficult for me, but for me it's also about more reflecting on my own background. What was interesting, I was in Ghana. I just came recently from Ghana, and exactly there I was. It's completely different culture, but somehow it made me more reflect on my background and also on because this is the country where the let's say after the fall of the Iron Curtain, they chose also to be more with Eastern Europe than to be with the West. And they have a different perspectives on these two regions. So it was interesting how each of the cultures enriches your understanding of the world and your own identity. So that's basically also one of my motivation to learn and to kind of not to be in one-dimensional world of only my own culture. Yeah.
But sometimes it's more difficult to do something about your own, which is very near to yourself. I'm a Moroccan originally, and I know how hard it's sometimes to do these kind of researches in Morocco itself, because it comes very near to yourself and to the people that you love, etc. So sometimes it's even, dangerous if you want to discuss things that have to do a lot with power, etc. And there is also a kind of reverse colonialism in a kind of way. And because we're such a global market as well, there are a lot of strength and powers and etc. So that it's also sometimes very difficult to interfere with this.
Interesting point also to think about further. You also still have a question.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask a question about the future of these spatial concepts, like the one we see on the screen. And I wanted to bring in Wil Zonneveld, because I happened to speak to him this morning. I don't know if you know him. He's I would say master on the spatial planning concept and the history of spatial planning in the Netherlands. And he said something, I want to read it first in Dutch, to not lose its meaning, and then I'll translate, it will be short. He said, het ruimtelijke planconcept als intellectueel, maar ook beleidsmatig sturingselement is verdwenen. Nationale ruimtelijke ordening is altijd van belang geweest voor het bedenken van dit soort concepten. Waar komen richtinggevende concepten vandaag vandaan? Deltares, PDL. Beleidsmatig is het maar de vraag of die voeten aan de grond krijgt. So the spatial planning concept as an intellectual and policy-driven steering element has disappeared. National spatial planning has always played a key role in developing such concepts. Where do guiding concepts come from today? Deltares, PBL. But from a policy perspective, it remains to be seen whether these will gain traction. So, since we are here as designers, wanting to step into place maybe with agencies like Deltares or PBL, what should the spatial planning concepts transform into, and maybe also related to Irene's story, what is the new process of getting there?
Wow, this is an interesting question. This one I will note down anyhow for in June. Spend the whole day on them, but perhaps there's some thoughts about it. Perhaps also from the audience. There are some people from PBL represented, so perhaps.
Perhaps I'm from PBL, but I didn't work on the scenarios, so I can speak freely. But I know it's PBL-based scenarios. We didn't. It's just showing advantages and disadvantages of one direction, and the government may choose. I hope they will somehow. But I'm not so hopeful about it. Because they're only concerned about the dwellings, 1 million dwellings.
Yeah.
So you agree a little bit with Wil that he is thinking like it will not lead to forceful spatial concepts that have actually some sort of agency in themselves, huh?
No, I'm afraid not.
No.
But it's depending on the government. It might change.
Floris?
Then you said it died or disappeared, and that maybe it was never there. And in that sense, I think planners always overestimate the power they have, as if we make plans and then reality will follow. I think it's the other way around. Reality evolves, and as planners we run behind it and trying to map it and act as if we are controlling it. And there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's about trying to grasp what are the real forces and can we work with it. And it's not that we control the forces, but that we can work with it. And in that sense, current time and age is very interesting. But the critical elements are happening beyond our control. I think one of the biggest revolutions in the Netherlands and maybe in Europe is that currently 40% of all the households are a one-person household. But that influences everything, the way we live, the cities, etc. Nobody controls it. We have to live with it, we have to work with it. And that is what makes life interesting. It's the lack of control.
If I can add on this, I feel, because I have also worked a bit in this, let's say, Delta urbanism processes. And I feel that one of the systemic issues we have is this very technocratic driven process. And we also, but that relates actually to what I say in the beginning, it's an attitude. It's the idea of we can give a solution to everything. It's even the fact that we think we have the power to define solutions rather than play with uncertainty. And I think it's also because it's very little exposed the capacity we have on decision making in our own, and we are very shy in taking those decisions, while others are not that shy. So, for instance, for me, when we are dealing with, or when I have dealt with Deltares doing projects, I was always in the beginning very shy, for instance, as a spatial planner, as a spatial designer, because I was literally the 10% of the business of the part. Well, they earn the most, they have project management, they have all the processes to go through with the whole force, and immediately the spatial planners become a very small group of that, and also a very small decision making. And if you are a young woman trying to make decisions in that big room, then you're dead. I personally, over the years, feeling like I need to be stronger on this, because actually the decisions that are being made in that room are really core in the way the people are going to live there. And I had that maybe thinking, that attitude, that critical aspect that led me to get stronger in that room and to get the strength to be stronger in that room. And I think that's the problem, that we are always debating what is our agency, but we're not acting on that agency many times. And I think that's where I come in with the justice by design idea. It's not to reach justice, but it's to really to make more justice every day in our practice. And I think that's the problem of the democratic approach, that we always feel smaller, we always feel we don't have the solution, because we are not efficient in that way. We are much more designer driven, and we develop social constructs to develop imaginaries, but those imaginaries can be transformed in a plan. But in that process of transformation and plan, we need to be also part of the table. And that's where I think many times we have been removed. And in the processes, I think, in the scenarios in the Netherlands, spatial design is really largely behind. Very behind on that process.
Good, very interesting. Okay, I want to go towards a wrap-up, because we have some soup and some drinks. But we also want to create an agenda for things to discuss in June. And I wrote down quite a lot, but perhaps you can add a little bit, and if you're smart enough, you can still push in a question. But I'm also wanting to have some ideas, and like what kind of topics should be raised. We've had quite a lot on the agenda already, but perhaps you can also help in formulating that or reformulating that, or you're missing something. So maybe I can ask you to see if you can change your question towards the statement.
It's good. Well, my question/statement was like, have we as designers lost our way to really communicate to the audience that we're speaking to, because we speak our language, but we don't speak their language, and that creates the disconnect of communicating our futures that is better for the other people, for everyone, because we somehow don't manage to speak the right language. That, like the brightest minds of the world right now are in marketing, and they tell people what they need, the new product, the McDonald's and the stuff, and somehow we are not able to communicate the things that are actually good for people.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that is a statement or question, but
well, it's definitely a topic. Yeah.
I could sort of relate to that, because what I actually wanted to react was at the very beginning. The first thing that was said, one of the first things was that we have to protect people against from what they want, And then I thought of the Rolling Stones, who said, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you get what you need. And then I thought, okay, what if it's not about giving people what they want, but rather really listening and asking what is needed here. And that relates to, I think, what were you saying, not like going directly at, okay, this is what people want, but really asking the right questions and getting to the bottom of what is needed. And then, how do you ask the right questions? In what context? And what, yeah, so I think that is really, with these different truths and the plurality of views, how do you hold those multiple truths at the same time?
That's also why I said necessity is the mother of invention. What do we really need?
Exactly.
That,
Yeah.
formulating that is the key.
And how,
I will just add a small thing on it. It was something in the in the project, the Snow Innocent Landscape. It was the project that I showed, like the second slide, and that I was doing also during the war in Ukraine, and which reflects not only just like the issues in Ukraine, but how it globally connects to the resources, etc. And just during that project, I was also exploring this extraction of minerals that we will need also for the green energy transition, etc. And for me, that was also very frustrating time to realize that it's going to bring a lot of new pollution, etc. And the base of that project is also that basically that what people think they need. It's like what we are debating as a political system, or like why our political institutions cannot really address the issues that are happening now, is because it's all very subjective. What you think you need, or like it's something that might be not very true still, but there are very real and objective reaction of the nature, like so that, and this is what was also the project is about. This kind of idea was to turn towards the, let's say, political of the nature and etc. So I just wanted to reflect that even if you think that you're gonna listen to people what they need, it might not be very true. We see it in America now, right? Like everyone.
Is that what they want or what they need?
They think they need it. They think they need this new economy. Like you go to Ghana and you understand. Oh my goodness, people just live completely different life there, and so it's. I trust people less and less.
Maybe also a good point to delve on further. You have still some point, statement, a concept that we could discuss later on.
Yes, what democratic design means is it was brought out a few times, and I sometimes struggle to reconcile with the concept of democracy. The themes are, what is democratic design and does it exist? Because I sometimes myself struggle to reconcile the notions of democracy, not just in its current state, but in the Western context, when democracy has relied on the exploitation of large parts of the world for centuries. So I struggle to understand what democratic design then means. Yes, that's all.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because Trump is what democracy.
But not just Trump. I'm talking about centuries of colonialism. Someone points out Goma and Congo, and you can see that with the embargo of the French in Western Africa, and Mali, and Burkina Faso, and Niger. So I really struggle to understand what democracy is when it's expressed in a Western context, because I feel like it's so hypocritical. What does that mean for design then?
It's a core question. Like, for instance, when you see this narrative, the Dutch narrative about nature-based solution and how much we're exporting knowledge, which we are doing is extracting, and colonially is dominating knowledge. Yeah. I think, for instance, the way we do nature-based solutions actually systematically has killed indigenous knowledge, and it has damaged it, and it's proof of it. It's very difficult to find the proof. I'm researching a lot about it now, but it's really difficult to change the narrative. So I think that democratic process, because they do it with locals, so that's covered. But then the question is like, what is actually being a democratic design? I think it's a really prompt question to deal with, because it talks about also the agency, and it talks in the times we are today. So I don't have the answer, but I do think it's one of the core questions.
You could also look at historical things that happened in countries before and their cultures. A lot was orally and not written, so there is a different kind of way. Design also, women designed textiles or jewels or whatever, and here we are inspired by all these things and now we call it design, But in history a lot was already done, but in different ways, and you can look into this, and then you find also kind of democratic procedures and processes.
Okay, interesting point. We're going towards last chance. So last chance for a topic you want to put on the
I
agenda.
wanted to bring up the life cycles of different entities or concepts, because when we think of policy, an urban idea, city, architecture, building or building fragment, all these elements have different life cycles. And what we respond is sort of what we know from before, but we don't really know what the future holds. And by the time we think a policy should change that will impact the urban system, etc., it almost becomes redundant because the topography changes around us.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how we can respond to it to have future resilient design, which is also a bit of a concept on air.
Okay.
And how can government versus architects have a dialogue about this?
Yeah, I think a good point. We put that on the agenda.
That is what I meant with whatever your act is, always think what will happen next. I think that is the problem with market and politics. It's short term, where the real questions all are long term. And I think that reflects your question.
Yeah.
Well, not if you can't pay your bill at the end of the month.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. I want to go towards thanking you all. Thanking you, of course, for attending and helping out and putting forward thoughts. Of course, I want to thank Floris Alkemade, Nikos, Irene, and Vesia for giving their introductions and helping this stimulating thought process. We definitely will continue. I also want to